It is September the 13th, 1940. 3 months previously, on June the 10th, Italy had joined her Axis ally Germany in war against the British. Upon war's outbreak in Poland in 1939, Italy had declared itself non-belligerent and played a waiting game. But Hitler's war machine had moved fast. Mussolini had no alternative now but to actively enter the conflict. The war was extended to the Mediterranean and Africa as the Italians joined the victorious Germans. Now the Italian army was about to embark on a venture to win themselves a great empire and assure them a position as one of the major powers on earth. The Battle of North Africa begins. The Italian plan was this. From Ethiopia, one army under the Duke of Aosta was to advance upon Egypt from the south. Another, under Marshal Rodolfo Graziani, was to drive east from Libya. Combined strength of the two armies totaled 500,000 men. Their opponents, hard-pressed at home, feeling the weight of the Nazi blitz against England, mustered 100,000 British and Commonwealth troops. The Italian attack began well. Graziani's forces struck at Egypt. The fall of France had secured their rear in Tunisia. England was fighting for its life in the Battle of Britain. So the Italians advanced into Egypt as far as Sidi Barrani. It was the greatest opportunity Italy had to increase her empire. These troops might have raced through Egypt and joined with the other Italian force in Ethiopia. But the goal of a great empire turned into an illusion, ultimately to disaster. The dreams of glory promulgated by Il Duce did not match with reality. The desert terrain was fearsome. Although the Italians dreamt of glory, the hard work involved in attaining it was another matter. The troops were often sick, always homesick. Morale became low. Italian tacticians made many mistakes. These mistakes proved costly. Under General Wavell, British forces surprised them at Sidi Barrani on December the 9th. The Italians had dallied there. Mussolini had threatened Graziani with loss of command if they didn't move on into Egypt. Now too late. British armor raced along the Libyan coast. Marshal Graziani had made a costly error by turning these coastal towns into fortresses, walled with barbed wire, guns, and anti-tank ditches. They would prove to be no match for the highly mobile British. El Solam, Bardia, Tobruk, Derma. One after another, the towns fell to the British. Benghazi. The Italians made a hasty exit, retired from the city. They were cut off by fast-moving armor and motorized infantry. The Italian army was trapped. British Empire forces captured over 133,000 prisoners, their own losses 604 men. By February the 8th, 1941, they occupied the eastern half of Libya, as far as the town of El Agila. General Wavell's victory in Libya protected Egypt on the west and left him free to destroy the Italian army in Ethiopia. The blitzkrieg tactics used by Germany so successfully were now employed by the British against the Axis partner. Under orders from Rome, the Duke of Aosta made a last stand, but by May the 19th, all Italian resistance had ended. Ethiopia, first of the fascist conquests, was liberated. The Emperor Haile Selassie returned to his kingdom. In Libya, British troops halted at El Agheila. The weakening of the British forces coincided with the arrival in Africa of a man who was to become of historic importance. February the 12th, 1941, General Erwin Rommel, veteran of the Polish and French campaigns, arrived to take command of the Afrika Korps. By March the 11th, the 5th Panzer Regiment had completed its disembarkation in Tripoli, equipped with 120 tanks and the most modern and fearsome of German war equipment. The Afrika Korps had been extensively trained for desert warfare. The men represented the best of the much vaunted Nazi culture. Special equipment for the troops had been provided by the Tropical Institute at Hamburg. The Afrika Korps comprised 2 armored divisions, each with 8,000 men and 135 tanks, plus the crack 90th Light Infantry Division. Rommel attacked the weakened British position on March the 24th. He continued to advance, the British continued to withdraw. On April the 1st, the Germans moved into Benghazi. Rommel had seized the initiative. He proved a formidable foe who commanded respect even though serving in the enemy cause. His strategy in using the awesome Mark III and Mark IV tanks, which outranged the British in firepower, was amazingly skillful. The British were forced to stabilize their forces farther to the east. The British had been pushed back into Egypt, but the retreat was not complete. One Australian division remained in Tobruk, a constant threat to Rommel's flank. Nazi propagandist Lord Haw called them the Rats of Tobruk. The term became an endearing one. The efforts to dislodge them cost Rommel time and strength. The area of Tobruk was about twice the size of the District of Columbia. The town itself consisted of plain one-story stucco buildings arranged in half a dozen crisscrossing streets. Rommel's intention was to attack Tobruk as quickly as possible, before the British had recovered from the onslaught of the Afrika Korps. The combined offensive he ordered on April the 10th was brought to a halt. His attacks on the 11th and 14th were also unsuccessful. By May the 2nd, Rommel had taken Solum, Capuzzo, had reconquered the rest of Cyrenaica. Tobruk held on. Rommel's greatest attack had failed to dislodge the gallant and heroic opposition. Few of the men in Tobruk ever had a roof over their heads. Strip life of everything that makes it worthwhile, and you have the standard of living in Tobruk at this time. Water was scant. Rations were merely a means of keeping alive. Only the essentials came through. Supply lines from air and sea were worth their weight in gold. The story of the desert in the summer of 1941 was the story of Tobruk. At the end of August, the Australian garrison was relieved, and colonial empire forces moved in. Tobruk was the severe thorn in the side of Rommel. This fine port, under British control, forced the Germans to move 1,500 tons of supplies daily over open desert wastes. Tobruk was sorely needed as a supply point close to the front. Thus, the siege was strengthened during September. On the morning of December the 4th, Rommel launched a heavy attack that was very nearly successful. The war in North Africa teetered back and forth. On May the 26th, 1942, the German offensive was launched in full force. Said Rommel, "To every man of us, Tobruk was a symbol of British resistance, and we were now going to finish it for good." Tobruk fell at 5 a.m. June the 21st, 1942. On June the 22nd, Rommel learned from Hitler's headquarters that he was a field marshal. Wrote Rommel to his wife, "I would much rather he had given me one more division." The prize Rommel had sought for over a year was finally his. At great cost to both sides. June the 30th. The Axis forces came to the El Alamein line. Alexandria was 65 miles away. The Germans had won a great victory at Tobruk and were moving rapidly. Field Marshal Rommel was at the peak of his professional career. It was at this time that General Auchinleck received a distinguished visitor from England. Mr. Churchill stayed for 5 days. Other new arrivals remained permanently. They were General Sir Harold R.L.G. Alexander, who replaced General Auchinleck as commander of the Middle East, and General Sir Bernard L. Montgomery, who took over General Rich's 8th Army. Your prime and main duty will be to take or destroy at the earliest opportunity the German and Italian army commanded by Field Marshal Rommel, together with all its supplies and establishments in Egypt and Libya. Signed, Winston Churchill. General Montgomery took hold at El Alamein. Meanwhile, Lend-Lease supplies rolled in. President Roosevelt ordered every spare Sherman tank shipped to North Africa. Both sides were girding for what obviously was to be a decisive battle. The British plan for the forthcoming Battle of El Alamein was to be the turning point in the Desert War. That was certain. All prayed that it should turn in their favor. The plan itself was simple. Blow a hole in the German positions, send in strong armor, and keep widening the gap. The Axis line at El Alamein was a maze of strongpoints for 35 miles. During October 1942, they were hit mercilessly from the air. Axis shipping was badly damaged. Thus, the stage was set. There was no secrecy about the British plan. General Montgomery had made it known to every man. In a personal message to his troops, he said, "The battle which is now about to begin will be one of the decisive battles of history. It will be the turning point of the war. The eyes of the whole world will be on us, watching anxiously which way the battle will swing. We can give them their answer at once. It will swing our way." Montgomery had said, "Give me a fortnight and I can resist the German attack. Give me 3 weeks and I can defeat the Boche. Give me a month and I will chase him out of Africa." Thus he instilled in his troops his own supreme confidence. They prepared. Guns ready. Equipment ready. Men ready. Rommel's troops were confident. German and Italian radios began promising complete independence for the Egyptian people and made dates for the Africa Corps with the ladies of Cairo and Alexandria upon their victory. October the 23rd, 1942, afternoon. While they could, Montgomery's men also relaxed and waited. In late afternoon, the British forces moved to the assembly areas. 9:40 p.m. A still desert night. The Battle of El Alamein begins. Guns had broken the silence. The roar was heard in Alexandria, over 60 miles away. The 8th Army was unleashed. General Montgomery chose the north to make a breakthrough. It would threaten the coastal road, which was the enemy's life, and would imperil his forces to the south. By dawn on the 24th, the Axis main defenses were bitten deep. Their Luftwaffe tried to halt Montgomery's forces in vain. British air power blasted them from the skies. By the 27th, all Axis reserve strength had concentrated in the north. An advanced position called Kidney Ridge was counterattacked 5 times in a single day by the 15th Panzers, but held out. October the 29th. After bitter fighting, the 9th Australian Division advanced due north across the coast road to a strong point known as Thompson's Post. There they stayed, while the enemy was hit by the RAF. Gradually, the enemy was drawn to the north. It was the moment General Montgomery had been waiting for. With Rommel concentrating everything to the north, gaps in the line were made to the south. And during November the 2nd and 3rd, the whole weight of the 8th Army poured west. The Germans were caught off balance. Taking advantage of the enemy's weakness, the British forces broke through all along the line. Said Rommel, "We were completely stunned. For the first time during the African campaign, I did not know what to do." His army was relentlessly pushed back. On came the British. back past the old familiar places. Hordes of prisoners were taken. The Axis had suffered its first great defeat. The tide had turned, and already in the United States and Britain, preparations were underway for the invasion of North Africa on a scale never before equaled in military history. It was, as Winston Churchill said, the end of the beginning.
The Washington Conference was top level. Prime Minister Churchill arrived from London. High-ranking members of the military staffs were present. The results of that conference were kept top secret. Few knew of the tremendous plan formulated there, which would call for preparations on a scale never before equaled in military history: the Allied invasion of North Africa. There were 123 days in which to get ready. Hundreds of ships to be prepared. Ships armed and loaded with some 700,000 items of equipment. Tons of supplies, stockpiled for what was to come. Vast numbers of troops suddenly found themselves engaged in intensive training. As the days passed, it was evident that something big was at hand, big enough to involve a maximum effort from two continents, from both Britain and America. But what? October 24, 1942. While the British 8th Army was smashing Rommel and the Germans at El Alamein, a vast troop convoy set sail from American ports. The next day, two convoys left Britain. In all, 3 convoys, 700 ships, traveling 5,000 miles. As yet, the men aboard the convoys had no inkling of the scope of their undertaking. Nothing to do but relax and wonder. Destination unknown. Speculations plentiful. Rumors even more so. As the days crawled by, tension mounted. What lay ahead for them and where? Finally, the secret was out. North Africa. The men were fully aware of the bitter fighting waged there for 3 years, of the Africa Corps, Rommel, and Tobruk. And as the convoy steamed onward, a bulletin was received of the retreat of the German army, resulting from the shattering El Alamein battle. The plan, invasion. The objective, rout the Axis powers from North Africa. The invasion was to be made hundreds of miles west of El Alamein at 3 points: Casablanca, Oran, Algiers. General Mark Clark had previously landed in Algeria to confer with French officers. General Henri Giraud would lead the Free French forces. The entire operation was under the command of General Dwight D. Eisenhower, appointed by the Joint Chiefs of Staff. At 3 a.m. on November 8th, the convoys converged west of Gibraltar. The events planned 4 months ago were about to become history. Now, everything depended upon taking the enemy by surprise. Lieutenant General George S. Patton, Jr. speaks.
Soldiers and sailors, it is not known whether the French African army will contest our landing. But all resistance, by whomever offered, must be destroyed. However, when any of the French soldiers seek to surrender, you will accept it and treat them with the respect due a brave opponent and future ally.
This was Casablanca, the northwest corner of Africa. H hour. The invasion began. The ensuing events now in the hands of fate. It was also H hour at Algiers. Planes based at Gibraltar flew over to give extra insurance for the success of the operation. And it was a success. Opposition in Algiers was slight. In a short time, it was in Allied hands. Oran, H hour. Here the paratroops went into action. Fighting was bitter. But after 2 hard days, troops of the enemy Vichy French capitulated. Oran was taken. 2 down, 1 to go. But at the Atlantic port of Casablanca, there was trouble. The Vichy French Navy still fought for the Axis. Fighting on the water was heavy. Allied guns pounded the port and the Vichy fleet. The battle lasted for 5 grueling days. But on November 12, Vichy Deputy Chief of State Admiral Darlan reached an agreement with General Eisenhower and ordered all French in Africa to cooperate with the Allies. Resistance ceased at Casablanca. The troops rolled in. Of the prisoners taken, none seemed to be very popular with the civilians. The greatest invasion in military history was a success. The enemy had been taken by surprise. The first phase in the Allied invasion of North Africa was over. In addition to General Eisenhower, the British First Army was commanded by General Anderson. The French troops were under General Giraud. The next step, move east swiftly. Time was precious. The Allies moved toward the Tunisian border, hoping to reach Bizerte and Tunis before the Germans could rush in reinforcements. We pushed on, despite all but impossible roads and shoddy railroad facilities. But still we moved on, by land and in the air, which was our best means of transportation. And it was by air that the German forces struck back. As they did, German reinforcements poured in from Sicily. November 18, the Allied advance guards entered Tunisia. Our line of supply was now 500 miles long. Fast. We had to. By November 22, the town of Béja was reached. Mejaz al-Bab, the terrain became more and more precarious. November 25, at Mejaz al-Bab, the first tank battle occurred. The Germans lost 15 tanks and withdrew. They moved back to the mountain approaches in the northern tip of Tunisia. At Mater, they waited. We attempted a thrust. It was all important. Time was running out. Winter was coming. This time, we failed. The Germans were too strongly emplaced. We fell back. The Tunisian front was now stabilized on a line running north and south from Mejaz al-Bab. For the North African winter had come. The war bogged down in a morass of mud. Hopes for a lightning victory in North Africa were forgotten. Airfields were flooded. Bad roads became worse. With the line stabilized, the war became a waiting game. reports at the time would say action was light on the Tunisian front. Actually, this light action accounted for half our casualties in the campaign. During this time, patrols were sent out continuously. If they were lucky, a few of the captive enemy would be returned. Sometimes they weren't so lucky. In the clouds, there was more activity. In a single week, Allied planes destroyed 241 enemy aircraft. We lost 89. From our bases, it was possible to make devastating attacks on Italy, Sardinia, and Sicily. But the main activity during this lull was the Battle of Supply. Both sides girded themselves. The British 8th Army was racing west from Libya to meet us. In Tunisia, the winter would soon be over. The crucial struggle loomed ahead. But there was one day when the struggle was momentarily forgotten. A day dedicated to peace on earth. Christmas in Tunisia, 1942. January 14, 1943. American troops in Casablanca were startled to see a familiar face from home. The president arrived. And Prime Minister Churchill came. General Charles de Gaulle and General Giraud were brought together to unite the fighting men of France. The Casablanca Conference was underway. It was held to set the requirements for victory, not only in North Africa, but all over the world. The ultimate object, no appeasement, no negotiation, nothing short of complete victory over the enemy. In the Civil War, General Grant had first used the term. Now President Roosevelt used it. Unconditional surrender. The stage was set. After the conference, Mr. Churchill flew to Tripoli and greeted General Montgomery. The climax in North Africa was approaching. But there was still fight in the enemy. The veteran 21st Panzer Division attacked, and German armor overran the Kasserine Pass. However, infantry and artillery support from the 9th and 34th Divisions, plus British units and bombers, stopped the Germans and drove them back through the pass. Though a setback to the Allies, there was something gained. The troops became, in General Eisenhower's words, battle-wise and tactically efficient. It was the last Nazi offensive in Africa. By this time, the British 8th Army had caught up with Rommel's forces at the Meurith Line. On March 15, 1943, Rommel was recalled to Germany. He never returned. His army had retired to the Meurith Line's fortified hills. With the Americans at Rock Nazi and the French to the south, Montgomery kept up a pounding assault on the line to divide Axis reserves. Hitting the enemy in front, he flanked to the left and delivered a telling blow. The New Zealanders moved on this flank. The 4th Indian Division circled the rear. American armor closed in, supported by heavy air assault. And the Merit line cracked. The Nazis abandoned the field with Allied armor on their heels. The Battle-Wise 1st Armored Division pushed east to cut off the enemy retreat. General Patton saw them close on the enemy flank. April 7, 1943, a big day. British patrols met advance guards of the American 2nd Corps on the Gab Road. Thus, Allied lines were linked. Now the British 8th could be supplied from North African ports, and troops could be shuttled along the entire Tunisian front. The U.S. 2nd Corps, under General Bradley, moved north to the Beja Road, which ran to Bizerte. The end was in sight. April 20, the British 8th opened the final offensive. Amphidaville was taken, and the natives began to return to their homes. Relentlessly, the Allies pushed onward to Bizerte and Tunis. The going was slow, tough, and dangerous because the enemy was holed up in the surrounding hills. Key positions often changed hands several times before the German defenders were forced to fall back. Hill after hill was stormed or flanked in bitter fighting. Our big attack was at Jabal Tahent, Hill 609. It was the main enemy position. On April 28 and 29, the enemy laid down a heavy mortar fire, and we replied with artillery as we attempted to storm the heights. The going was rough. On May 1, we took Hill 609. The plan for victory in the northern tip of Tunisia had been likened to a cylinder, a machine to compress the enemy until he was destroyed. The compression was about to show results. Swiftly, one by one, the towns on the road to Tunis and Bizerte fell. Matur, Massacalt, Ferryville. There was no stopping the Allied push now. The enemy found themselves forced into a pocket from which there was no escape. The Nazis may have invented the Blitzkrieg. We were improving on it. The armor forged ahead. Tanks broke through enemy lines. On May 7, 1943, the Germans were surprised by the Allied arrival outside Tunis. There was no organized resistance. For the Germans, there was no front left. The town of Tunis was turned into a carnival. The streets were so full of crowds and celebrations, traffic could hardly move. The same day, May 7th, at almost the same hour, we entered Bizerte. The reception here was not so jubilant. Hitler had ordered his troops to fight to the last cartridge, but there was no fight to the finish. Still fond of parades and brass bands, they marched in. Total, wholesale surrender. Among the 267,000 prisoners taken were 14 German and 4 Italian generals. Although our losses were relatively light, we had destroyed 250 enemy tanks and 2,330 aircraft. Now Air Marshal Tedder launched a furious assault upon Italian islands off the Tunisian coast. By June 13, the last ones were taken. The conquest of North Africa was complete. Now the Middle East was safe. Africa was liberated. And from there came re-echoing the phrase that would be fulfilled in the invasion of Italy, D-Day, VE Day, unconditional surrender. El Alamein had been the end of the beginning. For the Axis powers, it was now the beginning of the end.
To drive east from Libya, combined strength of the two armies totaled 500,000 men. Their opponents, hard-pressed at home, feeling the weight of the Nazi blitz against England, mustered 100,000 British and Commonwealth troops. The Italian attack began well. Graziani's forces struck at Egypt. The fall of France had secured their rear in Tunisia. England was fighting for its life in the Battle of Britain. So the Italians advanced into Egypt as far as Sidi Barrani. It was the greatest opportunity Italy had to increase her empire. These troops might have raced through Egypt and joined with the other Italian force in Ethiopia. But the goal of a great empire turned into an illusion, ultimately to disaster. The dreams of glory promulgated by Il Duce did not match with reality. The Italian army was trapped. British Empire forces captured over 133,000 prisoners. Their own losses, 604 men. By February the 8th, 1941, they occupied the eastern half of Libya, as far as the town of El Aguila. General Wavell's victory in Libya protected Egypt on the west and left him free to destroy the Italian army in Ethiopia. The blitzkrieg tactics used by Germany so successfully were now employed by the British against the Axis partner. Under orders from Rome, the Duke of Aosta made a last stand, but by May the 19th, all Italian resistance had ended. Ethiopia, first of the fascist conquests, was liberated. The Emperor Haile Selassie returned to his kingdom. In Libya, British troops The desert terrain was fearsome. Although the Italians dreamt of glory, the hard work involved in attaining it was another matter. The troops were often sick, always homesick. Morale became low. Italian tacticians made many mistakes. These mistakes proved costly. Under General Wavell, British forces surprised them at Sidi Barrani on December the 9th. The Italians had dallied there. Mussolini had threatened Graziani with loss of command if they didn't move on into Egypt. Now too late. British armor raced along the Libyan coast. Marshal Graziani had made a costly error by turning these coastal towns into fortresses, walled with barbed wire, guns, and anti-tank ditches. They would prove to be no match for the highly mobile British. El Solam, Bardia, Tobruk, Derma. One after another, the towns fell to the British. Benghazi. The Italians made a hasty exit, retired from the city. They were cut off by fast-moving armor and motorized infantry. It is September the 13th, 1940. 3 months previously, on June the 10th, Italy had joined her Axis ally Germany in war against the British. Upon war's outbreak in Poland in 1939, Italy had declared itself non-belligerent and played a waiting game. But Hitler's war machine had moved fast. Mussolini had no alternative now but to actively enter the conflict. The war was extended to the Mediterranean and Africa as the Italians joined the victorious Germans. Now the Italian army was about to embark on a venture to win themselves a great empire and assure them a position as one of the major powers on earth. The Battle of North Africa begins. The Italian plan was this. From Ethiopia, one army under the Duke of Aosta was to advance upon Egypt from the south. Another, under Marshal Rodolfo Graziani,